Okay, so in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to create custom dart manipulations. PatternLab actually comes with a whole variety of different, hang on, give me 1 second. The lab comes with a whole variety of different dart manipulations, or industry standard dart manipulations, and you can see them here. So if you go to select the block you're looking for, which is bodice, and then go fit, and then front, you can see that once you click on the seam or no seam, you get different options that appear, and you have the double, classic, princess, French, straight, mid armhole, the list goes on. And these are all industry standard dart manipulations. As you can see, we've selected the, let's go to French. You can see we've got the French dart manipulation, and we have the shoulder tip dart manipulation, and also, let's say, the straight. The reason why we have darts on a basic bodice block or any block is, or darts on any block, is because these are flat or two-dimensional objects. When we add, let's say, a dart, once this is closed, once this line is joined to this line, you will create fullness in the block, which would then accommodate the bust or the waist, etc. So this is why we add darts. But obviously darts are there, they're important because they add shaping to the block, but they also are design elements as well, which is why we have these quite interesting ones down the bottom. But if you want to add your own completely custom dart manipulations, this tutorial will show you how to do that. I'm also going to touch a little bit on curved darts as well, which is quite interesting. So this is simply what a dart is. If you're looking for a bit more information on what darts are, simply go down to our FAQ and there will be a frequently asked question about darts and their function. But in the meantime, let's just close this down. I have opened my ePattern up in Adobe Illustrator, and this is just a simple basic bodice block with our, I believe it's straight. No, it's with our classic dart manipulation selected. Okay, it's the most simplest one that we have on there to make it nice and easy when it comes to manipulations. Okay, so first of all, let me just explain a little bit about what you can actually do or where you can place your darts. So first of all, the bust point is a very, very important point. This is where we take all of our dart manipulations from. As you can see, this dart is actually about 2.5 centimeters away from the bust point. The reason why is because if you were to have this directly on the bust point, you would have a very pointy bust. It would be a little bit like Madonna's corset that Jean-Paul Gaultier made her, cone bust. So let's just simply move that down. So we have about 2.5 centimeters all around the bust point, just to give it a little bit of smoothing. But for us to rotate our dart, for us to actually create dart manipulations, we need to move this point back to the bust point. So let's just zoom in. You can do that using Control++, or to zoom out would be Control-. So we've just simply moved our dart, and this can be, so if you're working with the French dart, it'll probably stop about here. Just simply move that point into the bust point. Next, I'm going to get my line tool. Okay, so just click on this. Also, I'm going to remove the fill and give it a color, let's say red, so it stands out. Okay, let's click OK. Then from the center of that bust point, let's just zoom in to make sure we have the center. I'm going to click and drag my line, let's just say out to the side, just for the time being. I'm then going to click minus to zoom out. Go to my small selection tool, click off, and then click on this one point, and as you can see now I can move it around the entirety of my front bodice block. Okay, I can place it anywhere that I wish. So this is where it comes to creating our custom dart manipulations. If you want to measure it, for example, if you have a design and you want it to be, your dart to be, let's say 10 centimeters below the armhole, you can do this by simply going to your line tool and clicking and then going, let's say 10 centimeters. You don't have to necessarily worry about the rotation. We can rotate it ourselves. So this is a 10 centimeter line. I'm then going to go to, let's just select that line again. Let's go to my rotation tool, click, and then rotate until it's in line with that side seam. Click off, and as you can see, our point is roughly there. So I can simply, using my small selection tool, click that end point and then drag it until, see how they lock? Until they meet. And I know for a fact that that's 10 centimeters from under the arm. If, for example, you want to do it, let's say 2 centimeters from the neck, simply click. Let's do 2 centimeters. And then here, directly vertically down, I know is 270 degrees. But as I said, once again, you can always, let's say, select this and then using your rotation tool, rotate it into the correct position. Okay, let's just move that. Perfect. So I'm now going to, with my small selection tool, click on that end point for that line, click and drag, and then move it so it hits that 2 centimeters lower, that guideline, and we can now delete that. When you delete, make sure you delete a few times because you're going to remove the points. Let me just explain that in detail. So this line, it's made up of 2 points and the line itself. If I click delete once, you'll see the line's gone, but the 2 points remain. These can get in the way and cause problems. So just delete again, and they'll also go as well. Anyway, let's get back to rotating or manipulating this dart. So as you can see, essentially what we want to do, if you're using paper, we want to cut along this line from that bus point all the way up to that center front line, which will give us 2 separate panel pieces. The way we do this in Illustrator is simply small selection tool, click on that line, go to my cut tool, click, and then cut. Just simply click where that line intersects and click on the bus point. As you can see, this is now one separate piece, and this is now one separate piece, which is great and will help us. So I'm simply now going to delete this red line because we don't need it anymore. Essentially, we kind of already have it there. It's just invisible at the moment. And I'm going to go to my pathfinder because I want to join this. I want to make this one block. I want to make sure there is a line between these 2 points. I'm going to go to my pathfinder. If you can't find that, go to Window and then have a look down, Pathfinder, and it will bring it up for you. Then we're going to click on the first, let's say, the first suggestion or option, which is Unite, and that will then close that block. We're going to do exactly the same for the other side. So we now have these 2 ends that are open. I'm going to click Unite, and that then seals our block. Next, I'm going to get my big selection tool, and essentially I want to have these as 2 separate items. At the moment, it's one whole block because these patterns come grouped. So to then ungroup this, to have them as 2 separate pieces, I'm going to go to Object, I'm then going to go Ungroup. Let's have a look. Yep. So these pieces are now completely separate from one another, which is great, but at the same time, I need this little notch point here to remain with this block. So I need to group this block and this notch point. That way when I move it, that notch point will always be in the right place. This is important because when we actually set our sleeve into this block, the standard sleeve that we have in PatternLab, this is actually a point which, it's a location, it's like a registration point. This will match up with a point on the sleeve that allows you to set that sleeve head in. So we always want to make sure that these are together. So to cut a long story short, with my big selection tool, I'm going to click and drag over the elements of the block that I want to keep. If there are other elements that fall outside my selection, I can always hold down the Shift key and then click and queue up selections. But we don't want these to be joined to our block, so let's just unselect those. Once I have the bits that I need, so the PatternLab logo and the description and our, let's say, little, our notch, I'm then going to go to Object and then Group. Now this, when I click off it and click on with my big selection tool, it brings everything together, which is great. I'm going to do exactly the same with this bottom panel. So let's take our grain line, let's take our bus point, and let's go Object and then Group. Perfect. So we now have 2 completely separate pieces. I mean, essentially, you could have these as 2 separate pieces and just sew it up like that, and you'd have this lovely seam that runs from the waist to the bus point to the center front. But we want to create a dart manipulation. So the next protocol is to simply, let's click on this block here. Okay, let's go to my rotation tool. Let's click on the bus point, and we're going to rotate. So whatever we're taking out of this bottom dart here, so if we close this bottom dart, as you can see, the same amount opens up on the opposite side. This is fine. This is great. Essentially, when we sew this together, it would be exactly the same bust shaping that we would have if this bottom edge was open. Okay, so whatever you do, as long as it's rotated around that one point, these 2 will always be the same. So the shaping on your block will always remain the same. Also, one thing to note, it's a really good idea when it comes to your grain line to have this block as stationary. So for example, this is the center front, always have the center front running along the grain line. So if you are doing manipulations, I would say it's a good idea to rotate this block around the block with the center front. If we were, however, to do it the opposite way, so let's just take this and then rotate it the opposite direction, this would not really create a particularly good block if our grain line was going straight down. Luckily, we've kind of brought it with us, but if we simply remove the grain line and rotate that panel, this isn't going to create a very nice block. Okay, the material is going to be off if you use this as your grain line. Also, you'd lose your center front fold line too. So let's simply this is a lot of information. I'm very sorry, but it's important, and it's good to follow good conduct. So I'm simply going to rotate towards my center front. Okay, my center front always has to remain vertical. Wonderful. So we've now created a new completely custom dart manipulation. But now we want to join these two blocks together because they are two completely separate blocks. The way to do this in Adobe Illustrator is to go to your pen tool, click and hold, and then go Add Anchor Point Tool. I'm then going to click on this line just here, and I'm going to overlap these two patterns. Okay, let me take the fill out so you can see those two patterns overlapping. There we go. So I've simply moved this point until it overlaps. Next, I'm going to click and select on both of them, and I'm going to use my Pathfinder and then unite these two blocks. And there you have it. We now have our finished pattern piece, which is looking fantastic. Okay, so that's one way of doing a dart manipulation. Well, essentially is the only way of doing a dart manipulation. There is another possible type of dart we can create, which is a little bit more eccentric, let's say, which is, let's just go back. Okay, that's perfect. Is to create a curved dart manipulation. So, for example, let's get our pen tool. I'm just going to click anywhere on this side seam. I'm then going to move across to my bust point. I'm going to click and hold this time, and I'm then going to move it around. Okay, and this creates a nice curved line. So instead of having a straight dart, you can have a curved dart, for example. Obviously, the closer you get, the slighter that line is, and I'm still clicking and holding here and moving my mouse around. The further away you get, the more voluptuous that line gets, the more dramatic that line gets. And obviously you can rotate it to then have it in whatever direction you want. I wouldn't recommend doing something like this. That's going to be very hard to sew. Just keep it nice and easy like that. Also, let's zoom in, Control Plus. As you can see, that's not directly on our bust point, which is a problem. So let's go back. Let's click on our small selection tool, click off, find that point, and then drag it to the bust point. Brilliant. Okay, so we now have this lovely curved, let's say, dart, which is almost like a French. It's like a curved French dart. So what I want to do now is similar to what we did in the last case. I'm going to go click with my small selection tool. I'm going to select the outline of my block. I'm going to go to the cut tool. I'm going to click where those two lines intersect and cut. Same with this, cut. If you're using a paper pattern, you'd draw this line and then you'd be cutting along this line to separate these two panels. So we now have two completely separate blocks. Okay, look at that, lovely. However, we're going to do something slightly different than we did the first time. So the first time, we simply selected this lower block and then we clicked Pathfinder and we joined them. But unfortunately that gives us a straight line because this Pathfinder joins these 2 points at the easiest possible way. So it's just a straight line from point to point. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking to use this line here because we've just drawn it. So I'm simply with my big selection tool, I'm going to click on that line. I'm then going to go Edit, Copy, and then Edit, Paste. And as you can see, we have a new line, which is exactly the same as the existing one. I'm then simply going to click and drag it until it lies directly over the top of our existing line. The reason why is we have two lines and we have two pattern pieces. So if I was to select that line and then holding down my shift key, select the bottom, this is grouped. Once again, good practice when it comes to grouping. First of all, before doing anything, I'm going to ungroup this whole block, which should give me that bottom panel piece, which is great. Yep, we have it. I'm going back to the tutorial, select that bottom panel, then using the shift key, hold down the shift key, select one of those red lines, and then going to click and drag and move this down. Okay, the reason why we have those two lines is so we can separate those two blocks and still have a curved line for each. So next, I'm simply to complete these blocks, to join this line to this, I'm going to go to my small selection tool. I'm going to click and drag over those 2 points. I'm then going to right click and click average. Now average doesn't join these lines. What it does is it makes sure those points overlap so they can become one. If they're slightly further away, it would basically average these 2 points together. That's probably not a very good description, so let me go in and explain a little bit further. So let's just simply move that. Let's move this apart. Let's then select those 2 points. Let's right click and go average. And what it does is if you click both, it'll average those 2 points together. Let's go back because that's going to mess our block up. So always good practice is to simply click and drag over those 2 points, right click, average always first of all, click OK, even if they are on top of each other. Then once again click, right click, and then join. Same here, we're going to click and drag, right click, average those 2 points, click OK. Once again, click and drag, and then right click, join. Okay, so this pattern is now completely sealed. It's one individual pattern piece, which is great. Once again, I'm going to do the same for the top edge. So I'm going to click off, small selection tool, click and drag, right click, average, OK, right click, join, and same thing for this point here. However, if I click and drag, I'm going to get more than those 2 points, and we can't actually join this bus point. So with my big selection tool, I'm simply just going to click and move this up slightly to take it out of the way. Go to my small selection tool, and then select those points, right click, average, OK, join. I can now move my bus point back to where it was, which is perfect. Okay, so we now have our 2 completely separate blocks. Next, to create this dart rotation, or to create this really lovely French curved dart, and not have a dart down the bottom here, I'm going to move this back into place so it meets the bus point, and these 2 lines should overlap, so essentially that should be one panel now. I'm going to click, and then going to go to my rotation tool. I'm going to click on the bus point, and then click and drag until that block is closed. And see, now we have one panel piece. Essentially these will be joined soon, and we have that one really lovely sloping or curving French dart. Next, as before, I'm going to go to my pen tool, click and hold until this dialog pops up, add anchor point, and then click about halfway on that line. With my arrow keys, simply move it over so they overlap. Go to my small selection tool, select those 2 pattern pieces, and then unite. And there we have it. We have our finished French curve seam block, custom dart manipulation. I'm just going to make that line black simply by clicking and then using my eyedropper tool. Click, same thing. Once again, this has a fill in terms of layers, so let's just get rid of that fill so we can see our text layers. There we go. And that's it, perfect. There is one thing to note, actually, which I forgot in the first place, which is quite important, is when you're actually creating these dart manipulations, you always want to make sure, just so you have a bit of smoothing over the bust, that the dart falls 2.5 centimeters away. So, for example, let's go in. It can't hurt to do it one more time. I'm going to create a custom straight dart. So I'm going to find this bust point. Let's just zoom in. Let's make sure that's on the bust point. Okay, this is going to intersect roughly here. Let's make that red. Okay. Next, I'm going to drag this point to the bust point. I'm going to do this quite quickly because I've been through this. I'm going to cut these 2 points. There we go. I'm then going to rotate my block out. Click. Let's just rotate. Then let's close that block. Let's close the other block. Let's get rid of the red line, and then let's simply marry these 2 blocks so it's one. Okay, so this is our dart manipulation. Now, as I said before, to create bust smoothing, if we were to sew this up, she would have a pointy bust. So to create bust smoothing, so it's nice and soft over the bust, we want to basically move this point 2.5 centimeters away from the bust point. Okay, I'm simply going to go to my ellipse tool. I'm going to, let's just click anywhere, just click, and it brings up this dialog box, and I'm going to put 2.5 centimeters and 2.5 centimeters, so width and height. Let's click OK. Now I have my circle. I can then move that to the bust point. Let's take the fill off it. And then this will give us a point at which our dart should be placed, okay, somewhere in the middle here. So then all we do is simply click that point, drag it out so it's roughly in the middle. You see how there's even spacing either side? Let's just do that again. So somewhere in the middle of these 2 points, let's click and drag, and that will give us a really nice smoothing over the bust. Okay? As I said, if you have any questions about this tutorial, feel free to comment in our comment section below the tutorial, or please give us an email at info@patternlab.london. We look forward to hearing from you.